It is their shared love for flying and the overwhelming attraction to blue skies that bring Laurie Kay, Jeff Birch and Scully Levine here to prepare their pit specials for some relaxed Sunday morning flying, something that they have been doing together as a team for the past 15 years. These top commercial airline pilots, who all started their careers in the South African Air Force, apply their extensive talent and experience to do breathtaking low-level formation aerobatic flying. They have logged more than 750 displays as a team and displayed their skills to more than 60 million people around Southern Africa. They find formation aerobatics a way to express their love of flying in a more flamboyant way. In 1995, at the final of the Rugby World Cup at Ellis Park, South African Airways started a tradition which has become a hallmark of the airline's involvement at large international events. And senior captain Laurie Kay was the obvious choice to lead the SAA team in this exciting new exercise.
I was lucky enough to do the 747 fly past at the Rugby World Cup in 1995. And that was probably one of the highlights of my aviation career.
The planning and preparation for this historical flypast by a passenger aircraft over Ellis Park Stadium presented an immense challenge for all involved. But at the time, the first flypast by a South African Airways aircraft was seen as a meaningful display of patriotism, as the crowd of 80,000 cheered the Springboks to an historical victory. Seen by more than 1,000 million people around the world, SAA's involvement in this event will go down as one of the most spectacular aerial displays of all times.
You ask people about the Rugby World Cup final, for example, and everyone remembers the game and the victory. They remember Nelson Mandela being there in the jersey, and they remember the Boeing. I mean, it's the best PR and advertisement they can get. And I think that it's so important the rest of the world sees world-class events coming out of Africa. I think it's just wonderful.
So popular was the first South African Airways flypast that when Bafana Bafana played in the African Cup of Nations a few months later, the airline again showed its support of the country's sportsmen in yet another well-timed flypast. As the official carrier of the South African Olympic team in 1996, South African Airways created this aerial spectacle, the Indizani. And on the 29th of June that year, the day before the departure of the South African team to Atlanta, the Indizani showed off its brilliant colors to the South African public. It visited 4 cities, doing several low-level flypasts, leaving millions of South Africans gasping in awe. After flying from Johannesburg International Airport to Durban, Indizani streaked across the sky to Air Force Base Langebaan on the west coast of southern Africa. 4 F-1 Mirages from No. 1 Squadron of the South African Air Force had departed their base near the Kruger National Park on the eastern side of the country sometime earlier and had been refueled in flight. The Mirages met in Ndizani over Langebaanweg, and the formation then graced the skies around the fairest cape in all the world. The precision flypasts that followed were a display of aviation professionalism, and this unique sight was enjoyed by thousands of South Africans as the formation danced against the breathtaking backdrop of Table Mountain.
I was approached to look at the feasibility of putting 3 747s in formation at the inauguration of President Thabo Mbeki on the 16th of June 1999. Most important thing was to have people who were capable of flying in formation. Fortunately, in South African Airways, we do have a formation aerobatic team. We have 6 members in the South African Airways who do fly in the Pitts formation aerobatic team. So it was a natural choice to take these fellows. I phoned up Scully Levine and I phoned up Jeff Birch, and they were both available to fly.
We've had a lot of experience. We've done a lot of flying before in various types of aeroplane. The 747 obviously is a different kettle of fish, but with a little practice and a little bit of briefing and discussion, it wasn't too much of a problem.
There's no way that I would ever have turned this down. I mean, this sort of opportunity comes along once in a lifetime.
And so the goal was set for 3 Boeing 747s to fly in formation over the Union buildings just after the new president had taken the oath of office. The challenge was enormous. The dedicated South African Airways team spent days in preparation and planning. The aircraft were prepared for this world-first aerial display, and messages to the new president were attached to the bellies of the Boeings. The flight team, under the leadership of Senior Captain Laurie Kay, designed and refined the flight plan several times until they were certain that each detail had been taken care of. The build-up to the event was met with enthusiasm from the entire SAA team, and endless preparations were meticulously executed. A few days before the event, Laurie Kay joined the South African Air Force for a reconnaissance flight.
The reason that we've been flying with the South African Air Force now is to have a look at the run-in headings, to look for high ground, to look for obstacles, to look for aerials, to get features on the ground that we can use as landmarks, because when we're behind the Union buildings, we've got to know where we are in relation to the Union buildings. We can't see them. They're on the southern side of the hills there, so we have to be able to plan this exercise completely.
The 16th of June, 1999, and more than 4,500 dignitaries and guests start arriving at the Union buildings for the inauguration of President Thabo Mbeki, the second democratically elected president of South Africa. For the SAA flight team, it's all systems go as they go through their checklists for the last time and prepare to take off for this historic flight.
Well, yes, 1,000 feet now on Springbok Jumbo lead, or 2003, whatever they wish.
The exercise that lay ahead was technically demanding for the huge Boeing 747 passenger aircraft, which were not designed for this type of flying.
The 747 has got some synthesized voices that come on if you've forgotten to lower the gear, or if you're flying with too many degrees of flap extended. So we had to pull certain circuit breakers so that we could fly with the gear retracted and the flaps at a flap 25 position. We opted not to go for the full flap position because there's a blowback facility, and which causes quite a lot of trim changes. So we used 25 degrees of flap, and that was the configuration we basically opted to fly in throughout this exercise.
As the pilots awaited the takeoff clearance, the tension in the cockpit mounted. They knew that they were exposed to the eyes of the world, and what they were about to do had never been attempted before. But their experience, the knowledge that they were flying state-of-the-art aircraft, and their trust in their teammates gave them the confidence to proceed.
It's a big aeroplane, isn't it, Brian?
As the focused pilots took to the skies, they were fully aware of the limitations of their aircraft in this role and the demand for safety at all times. As the proceedings at the Union Building started, everyone was relieved when the formation was set up exactly on time.
We had the two aeroplanes that we were using, the two 400s with the messages under the wings, were actually in London the night before the inauguration. One aircraft flew directly from London to Johannesburg, and the other aircraft went from London to Cape Town, and we flight planned that at a high-speed cruise, and then it flew with the formation team, etc., as such on board, from Cape Town to Waterkloof. I heard this voice say, "Laurie, look out your left-hand side." And here, coming down on the left, on the descent, was Scully. He'd just arrived from Cape Town. So we all got overhead Waterkloof within 30 seconds.
There was a large pitch and trim change required when power changes were made during the maneuvering. You couldn't really assist it with trim, and you had to fly the aircraft manually, so there was a lot of pressure on the control column most of the time. But once the aircraft was stabilized for the actual flight past, the flying became a lot easier.
Formation flying revolves around dedication, total trust between the pilots, knowing your limitations and the limitations of your aircraft. Communication between the pilots is vital. The wingmen, having established their reference points, maintain their positions relative to the leader throughout any maneuvering that he does. Unfailing concentration is demanded of the pilots at all times.
When we were given a time over target and we left our reference point on the ground, we could not turn back. If we had to turn back for any reason, they could expect us another 7 to 8 minutes later.
Okay.
This awesome formation flew over the Union buildings in Pretoria twice. They flew at a safe altitude at a speed of 155 knots, banking gracefully for the South African nation and the world to see.
You have to realize is that when a formation banks, the aircraft that is on the inside of the turn has to move down and lose a lot of altitude. The aeroplane on the outside of the turn has to gain a lot of altitude. Now, when you take the huge size of the 747 and the separation that is required between the machines, as the leader commences a turn, you have to lose up to 150 to 180 feet in altitude. And because you're on the inside of the turn, you have to slow the aeroplane down considerably. By the same token, if you happen to be on the outside of the turn, like Jeff was most of the time, he had to gain 150 to 180 feet in height, and he had to accelerate at the same time. And what took a little bit of getting used to was this huge change in altitude that you had to cope with every time that the formation turned.
For the pilots to set up and maintain this perfect formation in such a large aircraft, technical adjustments have to be made.
2 and 3, stand by to brake. Stand by to brake. Brake, go. Scully, you've got the lead.
As a last respectful salute to the new president, the two wingmen broke away from the formation and a single Boeing 747 flew past the Union buildings. Everyone who had the privilege to be involved in this historic event will savor the experience forever, knowing that they had been part of aviation history in the making. This was a memorable occasion for South African Airways and South Africa. The flight team drew on their many years of aviation experience and their deep love of flying to create yet another world first and instill a feeling of national pride. Through the efforts of so many people within South African Airways and the support of all concerned, the Flight for a Nation was an unbelievable success.
As pilots sitting on the flight deck, we tend to forget the size and the immensity of the 747. You're cocooned in the cockpit and you don't really realize what is happening behind you. As we were flying in formation and as we drew closer to one another and this aircraft got closer and closer and I slid into formation, I realized once again the awesome sight of a 747 in flight and flying in close proximity with an aircraft of that size and that beauty. It was just such a feeling that I don't think I'll ever forget it.
I was terrified that I was going to let the side down. I was worried about not being able to keep station properly, not being able to rise to the occasion. I realized that there was so much at stake over here, not only from the safety point of view, but also from putting on a good show. Your professional pride is such that you want to do well. And I can only say that at the end of it, I was happy that I had risen to the challenge, that I hadn't let the side down, that I hadn't made a mess of things, and I felt a tremendous feeling of self-fulfillment.
I saw just how professional they were. I mean, I'm no expert, but the attention to detail and the professionalism, it came through. I mean, it was just, as a study in concentration, being in the cockpit, it was magnificent. And then to actually be invited into the right-hand Boeing, I mean, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, to actually look out across the shoulder and see a Boeing literally, you know, you look like you could touch it, and then one on the other side, and framed with the Union buildings and the inauguration as we banked past. I mean, I think back on it and I can still hardly believe it.
It was an enormous occasion. First of all, which other airline in the world entrusts 3 of its pilots with 3 747s to fly in close formation? It was fantastic. I doubt whether it has been done in the world before, and I doubt if it will ever be done in the world again.
We've got such professionals in our flight deck crew at SAA, and I think it was a wonderful demonstration of the professional capacity of this company to pull off what we did, do it with the utmost level of safety. And it was a heck of a salute to Thabo Mbeki. He expected one Boeing to come by, but not three.
To the world, reaching for a new horizon, and we'll be a model for our land, and change it for the better. We will fly